Section 3 of The Girl from the Marshcroft by Selma Lagerlöf. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Reading by Lars Rolander. The Girl from the Marshcroft, Chapter 3. Helga from the Marshcroft came to Närlunda, and there all went well. She was willing and teachable, and grateful for every kind word said to her. She always felt herself to be the humblest of mortals, and never wanted to push herself ahead. It was not long until the household and the servants were satisfied with her. The first days it appeared as if Gudmund was afraid to speak to Helga. He feared that this Croft girl would get notions into her head because he had come to her assistance. But these were needless worries. Helga regarded him as altogether too fine and noble for her even to raise her eyes to. Gudmund soon perceived that he did not have to keep her at a distance. She was more shy of him than of anyone else. The autumn that Helga came to Närlunda, Gudmund paid many visits to Älvåkra, and there was much talk about the good chance he stood of being the prospective son-in-law of this estate. That the courtship had been successful, all were assured at Christmas. Then the juryman with his wife and daughter came over to Närlunda, and it was evident that they had come there to see how Hildur would fare if she married Gudmund. This was the first time that Helga saw at close range her whom Gudmund was to marry. Hildur Eriksdotter was not yet 20, but the marked thing about her was that no one could look at her without thinking what a handsome and dignified mistress she would be some day. She was tall and well built, fair and pretty, and apparently liked to have many about her to look after. She was never timid. She talked much and seemed to know everything better than the one with whom she was talking. She had attended school in the city for a couple of years and wore the prettiest frocks Helga had ever seen, but yet she didn't impress one as being showy or vain. Rich and beautiful as she was, she might have married a gentleman at any time, but she always declared that she did not wish to be a fine lady and sit with folded hands. She wanted to marry a farmer and look after her own house, like a real farmer's wife. Helga thought Hildur a perfect wonder. Never had she seen anyone who made such a superb appearance, nor had she ever dreamt that a person could be so nearly perfect in every particular. To her it seemed a great joy that in the near future she was to serve such a mistress. Everything had gone off well during the juryman's visit, but whenever Helga looked back upon that day, she experienced a certain unrest. It seems that when the visitors had arrived, she had gone around and served coffee. When she came in with a tray, the juryman's wife leaned forward and asked her mistress if she was not the girl from the Marshcroft. She did not lower her voice much, and Helga had distinctly heard the question. Mother Ingeborg answered yes, and then the other had said something which Helga couldn't hear. But it was to the effect that she thought it singular they wanted a person of that sort in the house. This caused Helga many anxious moments. She tried to console herself with the thought that it was not Hildur, but her mother, who had said this. One Sunday in the early spring, Helga and Gudmund walked home together from church. As they came down the slope, they were with the other church people. But soon one after another dropped off, until finally Helga and Gudmund were alone. Then Gudmund happened to think that he had not been alone with Helga since that night at the croft, and the memory of that night came forcibly back to him. He had thought of their first meeting often enough during the winter, and with it he had always felt something sweet and pleasant thrill through his senses. As he went about his work, he would call forth in thought that whole beautiful evening. The white mist, the bright moonlight, the dark forest heights, the light valley, and the girl who had thrown her arms round his neck and wept for joy. The whole incident became more beautiful each time that it recurred to his memory. But when Gudmund saw Helga going about among the others at home, toiling and slaving, it was hard for him to think that it was she who had shared in this. Now that he was walking alone with her on the church slope, he couldn't help wishing for a moment that she would be the same girl she was on that evening. Helga began immediately to speak of Hildur. She praised her much, said she was the prettiest and most sensible girl in the whole parish, and congratulated Gudmund because he would have such an excellent wife. "You must tell her to let me remain always at Närlunda," she said. "It will be a pleasure to work for a mistress like her." Gudmund smiled at her enthusiasm, but answered only in monosyllables, as though he did not exactly follow her. It was well, of course, that she was so fond of Hildur and so happy because he was going to be married. "You have been content to be with us this winter?" he asked. "Indeed I have. I cannot begin to tell you how kind Mother Ingeborg and all of you have been to me." "Have you not been homesick for the forest?" "Oh, yes, in the beginning, but not now any more." "I thought that one who belonged to the forest could not help yearning for it." Helga turned half round and looked at him who walked on the other side of the road. Gudmund had become almost a stranger to her. But now there was something in his voice, his smile, that was familiar. Yes, he was the same man who had come to her and saved her in her greatest distress. Although he was to marry another, she was certain that he wanted to be a good friend to her and a faithful helper. She was very happy to feel that she could confide in him as in none other, and thought that she must tell him of all that had happened to her since they last talked together. "I must tell you that it was rather hard for me the first weeks at Närlunda," she began. "But you mustn't speak of this to your mother." "If you want me to be silent, I'll be silent." "Fancy, I was so homesick in the beginning that I was about to go back to the forest." "Were you homesick? I thought you were glad to be with us." "I simply could not help it," she said apologetically. "I understood, of course, how well it was for me to be here. You were all so good to me, and the work was not so hard but that I could manage with it. But I was homesick nevertheless. There was something that took hold of me and wanted to draw me back to the forest. I thought that I was deserting and betraying someone who had a right to me, when I wanted to stay here in the village." "It was perhaps," began Gudmund, but checked himself. "No, it was not the boy I longed for. I knew that he was well cared for and that mother was kind to him. It was nothing in particular. I felt as though I were a wild bird that had been caged, and I thought I should die if I were not let out." "To think that you had such a hard time of it," said Gudmund, smiling, for now all at once he recognized her. Now it was as if nothing had come between them, but that they had parted at the forest farm the evening before. Helga smiled again, but continued to speak of her torments. "I didn't sleep a single night," said she, "and as soon as I went to bed the tears started to flow, and when I got up of a morning the pillow was wet through. In the daytime, when I went about among all of you, I could keep back the tears, but as soon as I was alone my eyes would fill up." "You have wept much in your time," said Gudmund without looking the least bit sympathetic as he pronounced the words. Helga thought he was laughing to himself all the while. "You surely don't comprehend how hard it was for me," she said, speaking faster and faster in her effort to make him understand her. "A great longing took possession of me and carried me out of myself. Not for a moment could I feel happy. Nothing was beautiful, nothing was a pleasure. Not a human being could I become attached to. You all remain just as strange to me as you were the first time I entered the house." "But didn't you say a moment ago that you wished to remain with us?" said Gudmund wonderingly. "Of course I did." "Then surely you are not homesick now?" "No, it has passed over. I have been cured. Wait, and you shall hear." As she said this, Gudmund crossed to the other side of the road and walked beside her, laughing to himself all the while. He seemed glad to hear her speak, but probably he didn't attach much importance to what she was relating. Gradually Helga took on his mood, and she thought everything was becoming easy and light. The church road was long and difficult to walk, but today she was not tired. There was something that carried her. She continued with her story because she had begun it, but it was no longer of much importance to her to speak. It would have been quite as agreeable to her if she might have walked silently beside him. "When I was the most unhappy," she said, "I asked Mother Ingeborg one Saturday evening to let me go home and remain over Sunday. And that evening, as I tramped over the hills to the marsh, I believed positively that I should never again go back to Närlunda. But at home Father and Mother were so happy because I had found service with good and respectable people, that I didn't dare tell them I could not endure remaining with you. Then, too, as soon as I came up into the forest, all the anguish and pain vanished entirely. I thought the whole thing had been only a fancy. And then it was so difficult about the child. Mother had become attached to the boy and had made him her own. He wasn't mine any more, and it was well thus, but it was hard to get used to." "Perhaps you began to be homesick for us?" blurted Gudmund. "Oh, no! On Monday morning, as I awoke and thought of having to return to you, the longing came over me again. I lay crying and fretting because the only right and proper thing for me to do was to go back to Närlunda. But I felt all the same as though I were going to be ill or lose my senses if I went back. Suddenly I remembered having once heard some one say that if one took some ashes from the hearth in one's own home and strewed them on the fire in the strange place, one would be rid of homesickness." "Then it was a remedy that was easy to take," said Gudmund. "Yes, but it was supposed to have this effect also. Afterwards one could never be content in any other place. If one were to move from the homestead to which one had borne the ashes, one must long to get back there again just as much as one had longed before to get away from there." "Couldn't one carry ashes along wherever one moved to?" "No, it can't be done more than once. Afterwards there is no turning back, so it was a great risk to try anything like that." "I shouldn't have taken chances on a thing of that kind," said Gudmund, and she could hear that he was laughing at her. "But I dared all the same," retorted Helga. "It was better than having to appear as an ingrate in your mother's eyes and in yours, when you had tried to help me. I brought a little ashes from home, and when I got back to Närlunda, I watched my opportunity when no one was in, and scattered the ashes over the hearth." "And now you believe it is ashes that have helped you?" "Wait, and you shall hear how it turned out. Immediately I became absorbed in my work and thought no more about the ashes all that day. I grieved exactly as before and was just as weary of everything as I had been. There was much to be done that day, both in the house and out of it, and when I finished with the evening's milking and was going in, the fire on the hearth was already lighted." "Now I am very curious to hear what happened," said Gudmund. "Think! Already as I was crossing the house yard, I thought there was something familiar in the gleam from the fire. And when I opened the door it flashed across my mind that I was going into our own cabin and that Father and Mother would be sitting by the hearth. This flew past like a dream, but when I came in, I was surprised that it looked so pretty and homelike in the cottage. to me your mother and the rest of you had never appeared as pleasant as you did in the firelight. It seemed really good to come in, and this was not so before. I was so astonished that I could hardly keep from clapping my hands and shouting. I thought you were all so changed. You were no longer strangers to me, and I could talk to you about all sorts of things. You can understand, of course, that I was happy, but I couldn't help being astonished. I wondered if I had been bewitched, and then I remembered the ashes I had strewn over the hearth."
Yes, it was marvelous, said Gudmund.
He did not believe the least little bit in witchcraft, and was not at all superstitious, but he didn't dislike hearing Helga talk of such things.
Now the wild forest girl has returned, thought he. Can anybody comprehend how one who has passed through all that she has can still be so childish?
"Of course it was wonderful," said Helga. "And the same thing has been coming back all winter. As soon as the fire on the hearth was burning, I felt the same confidence and security as if I had been at home. But there must be something extraordinary about this fire, not with any other kind of fire, perhaps, only that which burns on a hearth, with all the household gathered around it, night after night. It gets sort of acquainted with one. It plays and dances for one and talks to one, and sometimes it is ill-humored. It is as if it had the power to create comfort and discomfort. I thought now that the fire from home had come to me, and that it gave the same glow of pleasure to every one here that it had done back home."
What if you had to leave Närlunda? Said Gudmund.
"Then I must long to come back again all my life," said she, and the quiver in her voice betrayed that this was spoken in profound seriousness.
Well, I shall not be the one to drive you away, said Gudmund.
Although he was laughing, there was something warm in his tone. They started no new subject of conversation, but walked on in silence until they came to the homestead. Now and then Gudmund turned his head to look at her who was walking at his side. She had gathered strength after her hard time of the year before. Her features were delicate and refined. Her hair was like an aureole around her head, and her eyes were not easy to read. Her step was light and elastic, and when she spoke, the words came readily yet modestly. She was afraid of being laughed at. Still, she had to speak out what was in her heart. Gudmund wondered if he wished Hildur to be like this, but he probably didn't. This Helga would be nothing special to marry. A fortnight later, Helga heard that she must leave Närlunda in April, because Hildur Eriksdotter would not live under the same roof with her. The master and mistress of the house did not say this in so many words, but the mistress hinted that when the new daughter-in-law came, they would in all probability get so much help from her they would not require so many servants. On another occasion, she said she had heard of a good place where Helga would fare better than with them. It was not necessary for Helga to hear anything further to understand that she must leave, and she immediately announced that she would move. But she did not wish any other situation and would return to her home. It was apparent that it was not of their own free will they were dismissing Helga from Närlunda. When she was leaving, there was a spread for her. It was like a party, and Mother Ingeborg gave her such heaps of dresses and shoes that she, who had come to them with only a bundle under her arm, could now barely find room enough in a chest for her possessions.
I shall never again have such an excellent servant in my house as you have been, said Mother Ingeborg. And do not think too hard of me for letting you go. You understand, no doubt, that it is not my will, this. I shall not forget you. So long as I have any power, you shall never have to suffer want.
She arranged with Helga that she was to weave sheets and towels for her. She gave her employment for at least half a year. Gudmund was in the woodshed splitting wood the day Helga was leaving. He did not come in to say good bye, although his horse was at the door. He appeared to be so busy that he didn't take note of what was going on. She had to go out to him to say farewell. He laid down the axe, took Helga's hand, and said rather hurriedly, "Thank you for all," and began chopping again. Helga had wanted to say something about her understanding that it was impossible for them to keep her and that it was all her own fault. She had brought this upon herself. But Gudmund chopped away until the splinters flew around him, and she couldn't make up her mind to speak. But the strangest thing about this whole moving affair was that the master himself, old Erland Erlandsson, drove Helga up to the marsh. Gudmund's father was a little weazened man, with a bald pate and beautiful and knowing eyes. He was very timid and so reticent at times that he did not speak a word the whole day. So long as everything went smoothly, one took no notice of him. But when anything went wrong, he always said and did what there was to be said and done to right matters. He was a capable accountant and enjoyed the confidence of every man in the township. He executed all kinds of public commissions and was more respected than many a man with a large estate and great riches. Erland Erlandsson drove Helga home in his own wagon, and he wouldn't allow her to step down and walk up any of the hills. When they arrived at the marsh croft, he sat a long while in the cabin and talked with Helga's parents, telling them of how pleased he and Mother Ingeborg had been with her. It was only because they did not need so many servants that they were sending her home. She, who was the youngest, must go. They had felt that it was wrong to dismiss any of those who were old in their service. Erland Erlandsson's speech had the desired effect, and the parents gave Helga a warm welcome. When they heard that she had received such large orders that she could support herself with weaving, they were satisfied, and she remained at home. End of section 3, read by Lars Rolander.